L. Weston's From Ritual to Romance. It's a 1920 book, so. Chapter 14, The Author. Having now completed our survey of the various elements which have entered in the composite fabric of the Grail legend, the question naturally arises, where and when did that legend assume romantic form, and to whom should we ascribe its literary origin? On these crucial points, the evidence of our disposal is far from complete, and we can do little more than offer suggestions towards the solution of the problem. With regard to the first point, that of locality, the evidence is unmistakably in favor of a Celtic, specifically a Welsh, source. As a literary theme, the Grail is closely connected with the Arthurian tradition. The protagonist is one of Arthur's knights, and the hero of the earlier version, Gawain, is more closely connected with Arthur than are his successors, Perceval and Galahad. The Celtic origin of both Gawain and Perceval is beyond doubt, and the latter is not merely a Celt, but is definitely Welsh. He is always Lee Galois. Galahad I hold to be a literary and not a traditional hero. He is the product of deliberate literary invention, and has no existence outside the frame of the latter cyclic redactions. It is not possible at the present moment to say whether the quest was composed in the British Isles or on the continent, but we may safely lay it down as a basic principle that the original Grail heroes are of insular origin, and that the Grail legend, in its romantic and literary form, is closely connected with British pseudo-historical tradition, the beliefs and practices of which, if the theory maintained in these pages be correct, the Grail stories offer a more or less coherent survival, can be shown on the evidence of historic monuments and surviving folk customs to have been popular throughout the area of the British Isles, while with regard to the higher teaching of which I hold these practices to have been the vehicle, Pliny comments upon the similarity existing between the ancient magical gnosis and the druidical gnosis of Gaul and Bretagne, an indication which, in the dearth of accurate information concerning the teaching of the Druids, is of considerable value. As we have noted in the previous chapter, an interesting long parallel exists between Wales and localities such as the Alps and the Vosges, where we have definite proof that these mystery cults lingered on after they had disappeared from public celebration. The chart appended to Camont's monuments, de Mithra, shows Mithraic remains, and precisely the locality where we have reason to believe certain of the Gawain and Perceval stories to have originated. As to the date of origin, that of course is closely connected with the problem of authorship. If we can, with any possibility, identify the author, we can approximately fix the date. So far as literary evidence is concerned, we have no trace of the story before the 12th century of the Common Era. But when we do meet with it, it is already in complete and crystallized form. More, there is already evidence of competing versions. We have no existing Grail romance which we can claim to be free from contamination and representing in all respects the original form. There is no need here to go over old and well-trodden ground. In my studies of the Perceval legend and in the later popular resume of the evidence, The Quest of the Holy Grail, I have analyzed the text and shown that, while the poem of Chrétien de Troyes is our earliest surviving literary version, there is the strongest possible evidence that Chrétien, as he himself admits, was not inventing but retelling an already popular tale. The Grail quest was a theme which had been treated not once nor twice, but of which numerous and conflicting versions were already current, and when Wouter de Nain undertook to complete Chrétien's unfinished work, he drew largely upon these already existing forms, regardless of the fact that they not only contradicted the version they were ostensibly completing, but were impossible to harmonize with each other. It is of importance for our investigation, however, to note that where Woucher does refer to a definite source, it is to an evidently important and already famous collection of tales, Le Grand Conte, comprising several branches, the hero of the collection being not Chrétien's hero, Perceval, but Gawain, who both in pseudo-historic and romantic tradition is far more closely connected with the Arthurian legend, occupies as he does the traditional position of nephew, sister's son, to the monarch, who is center of the cycle, even as Cuchulainn is sister's son to Concobar, Diarmid to Finn, Tristan to Mark, and Roland to Charlemagne. In fact, this relationship was so obviously required by tradition that we find Perceval figuring now as sister's son to Arthur, now to the Grail King, according as the Arthurian or the Grail tradition dominates the story. The actual existence of such a group of tales as those referred to by Woucher derives confirmation from our surviving Gawain poems, as well as from the references in the elucidation, and on the evidences at our disposal. I have ventured to suggest that the hypothesis of a group of poems dealing with the adventures of Gawain, his son and brother, the ensemble being originally known as the Gesta of Sir Gawain, a title which, in the appropriate form, the Jest of Sir Gawain is preserved in the English version of that hero's adventure with Sister Brandalis. So keen a critic as Dr. Brugger has not hesitated to accept the theory of the existence of this jest, and is of the opinion that the German poem Vieux Kron may in part at least be derived from this source. The central adventure ascribed to Gawain in this group of tales is precisely the visit to the Grail Castle, to which we have already referred, and we have pointed out that the manner in which it is related, its directness, simplicity, and conformity with what we know of the mystery, reaching presumably involved, taken in connection with the personality of the hero and its position in the Arthurian romantic tradition, appear to warrant us in assigning to it the position of priority among the conflicting versions we possess. At 2 points in the retelling of these Gawain tales, Woucher definitely refers to the author by name, Bleharis. On the second occasion, he states categorically that this Bleharis was of Welsh birth and origin, nu et ingenuis en Galles, and that he told the tale in connection with the statement is made to a certain Comte de Poitiers, whose favorite story it was. He loved it above all others, which would imply that it was not the only tale of the Bleharis had told him. As we have seen in the previous chapter, the elucidation prefaces its account of the Grail quest by a solemn statement of the gravity of the subject to be treated, and a warning of the penalties which would follow on a careless revelation of the secret. These warnings are put into the mouth of a certain master, Bilihis, concerning whom we hear no more. A little further on in the poem, we meet a knight, Biliharis, who, made prisoner by Gawain, reveals to Arthur and his court the identity of the maidens wandering in the woods, of the Fisher King and the Grail, and is so good a storyteller that none can weary of listening to his tales. Again, in the fragmentary remains of Thomas's Tristan, we have a passage in which the poet refers to as a source to a certain Brehri, who knew all the feast and all the tales of all the kings and all the counts who had lived in Britain. Finally, Gyridalis Cambrensis refers to that famous storyteller, Bledhericus, who had lived shortly before our time, and whose renown he evidently takes for granted, was familiar to his readers. Now we are told that Blaherus, who according to Wauchier has told tales concerning Gawain in Arthur's court, one of which tales was certainly the Grail adventure, the Master Blaherus, who knew the Grail mystery and gave solemn